Our speaker today is Allison Schmidt, from a PhD student in history. She received her BA in English Literature, German, and History from Concordia College. I've been to Germany a couple of times. The first time as a Fulbright, I don't know if it was the first time, but a Fulbright English teaching assistant in Germany. And then after she got her MA in history here, she returned as a Fulbright again to do research on her dissertation, which, as I understand it, focuses on East European transmigrants and border control prior to World War I. That is partly the subject presentation.
Hey, thank you very much. My name is Allison, and as you've heard, I'm a PhD candidate here at KU. And a little bit of how I came upon this topic. Originally, I came here in fall 2009 to study German history, and I noticed as time went on, my interest started gravitating eastward, and that had something to do with the crowd I was hanging out with, which would be Center for Russian East European Studies graduate students. And I thought, okay, I'd like to write my dissertation on Czech migrants who went into Germany. So I went to Germany, and I was looking through the archives, and I saw some sources, and it had the word Durchwandrer on it. Now, Durchwandrer in German means, or in English means, transmigrants. And I thought, okay, what is this? I'll just look at it for a couple of weeks, and then I'll move on to my dissertation topic. Well, 2 weeks turned into 2 months, and here I am now talking about this with you. So, transmigration, what does that mean exactly? In some studies, it means reincarnation, but as far as migration goes, we are talking about the actual process of migration. And for a lot of scholars nowadays, this would be the traveling of Eastern Europeans who were going through Western Europeans or Northern European harbors en route to the Americas. So this would be circa 1890 to 1914. And for my research purposes, I'm focusing on the third-class passengers. This was very class-based, this border control. They were looking essentially at the poorer immigrants. In U.S. historiography, for those of you who are familiar with U.S. history, these are called new immigrants. So ethnically, they would be known as Slovaks, Czechs, Russians, Croats. In my sources, they refer to them mainly by the empires they came from, so Austro-Hungarian Empire, Russian Empire. New immigrants is based on the concept of old immigrants, which would be immigrants who came from more Western Europe, which would be Germany and England and Ireland, and this would have been mid-19th century. So these immigrants came a little bit later. And for many of these sojourners, this included a railway passage through Germany. So as you can see here, here's an advertisement that was in a calendar in Prague, and above you can see the agent Missler, he's from Bremen. They were not, at that time, I believe, allowed to put the actual name of the shipping company for different legal purposes, but you can see it's a speedy line to America or Australia or Africa, and these were all over the place in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Just to give you an idea of how they traveled, I'm sorry if my hands will be a little bit shaky, but many went from Russia to Hamburg and Bremen, or they went to Rotterdam and Antwerpen, and would travel like that through Germany. So why exactly did Eastern Europeans immigrate? Well, many scholars have come to the conclusion that it was for economic reasons. Of course, immigration is a very personal choice, but the conclusion is they thought they would have a better life in America, so they decided to go to America. There was also political persecution going on in Russia at that time, and also, especially for young men who wanted to avoid military service, they would sometimes migrate. Now, the shipping line market at that time was divided mainly between the UK and continental lines, so Dutch and German lines. And this is how they split it up. So earlier on I was talking about the old immigrants in the mid-19th century, and they decided around 1900 to split UK going Scandinavia, through here, and then continental lines would have all the market down here. So all the immigrants who were going through the continent. Now, that explains a little bit why they were traveling to Germany, because they wanted to go through the harbor cities. But also, as I mentioned before, there was a major agent network at work in the Austro-Hungarian and Russian empires. There were people advertising everywhere, and also sometimes they were closer than, say, if they wanted to go to harbors down here. So that was all well and good until about 1903, where the British line Cunard felt that it was completely unfair how the continental lines were owning the East European market. Because as you noticed here, they had only control of the UK and Scandinavian areas, so they were not getting much of the market. They decided to break off and form a deal with the Austro-Hungarian Empire by starting a line from New York to the city of Fiume, the Adriatic coast, right around here. Keep going. Okay. In 1903. Now, of course, the German lines were absolutely furious about this. They thought it was completely unfair that a UK line was starting a brand new route from New York to Fiume, and they thought, okay, we need to reclaim our shares in the market. What they noticed, however, was that Cunard was still sending passengers through Rotterdam. So they thought it would be a good idea to actually start enforcing border control on the Saxon-Bohemian border and fight for their market shares. The reason why passengers were still going through Rotterdam is because it was quite frankly closer than going back down to Fiume. Now here you can see the German state of Saxony. Oops. And here's the border with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and this would be known as Bohemia right here. So you have a lot of Austro-Hungarian immigrants going up through here. Pre-1903 border control, there was some in effect, but it was not as rigid as what happened in March 3rd, 1904. What they did is opened a registration station in the city of Leipzig. Now, a little bit of background of control and registration stations. I'm going to jog back to about 1893, or 1892, I should say. At that time, there was a major outbreak of cholera in Eastern Europe, and this eventually hit Hamburg, where about 8,000 people died. And they felt that the reason for the cholera outbreak was Eastern European immigrants. Now, for those of us who are a little bit more familiar with cholera, it spread not through human-to-human contact. But at that time, there was still debate about it, and it was a lot easier to blame the outsider than it was to blame the extremely poor infrastructure of Hamburg sanitation at that time. So what they did is struck a deal with the German government and set up control stations along the Prussian-Russian border. So here you can see at the top it says blue for Russians. So these lines are a little bit hard to see, but you can see blue lines, which means the routes that Russians primarily traveled along. And the red lines for routes that Austro-Hungarians primarily went along. So here and through here. You will notice, however, that there were, first of all, many more control stations on this edge, and then also on the edge of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they were primarily registration stations. The difference was, at a control station, immigrants were disinfected and bathed. And this was the idea, possibly, that this would prevent the spread of cholera. I like Laura's face right now. At registration stations, this did not happen. The difference, most scholars believe, is because generally it was thought that conditions in Russia were not as hygienic at that time, and that also that's actually where the cholera was breaking out. There were some cholera outbreaks later in Austria, and their policies actually changed later on. So the regulations at the Leipzig control station. What migrants needed to have as of 1904 were approved shipping tickets, so either German lines or their partner companies. If they did not have that, they needed to show 400 marks per adult and 100 marks per child, which was an insane amount of money for an immigrant to have. If they did have it, they did not want to show officials for fear that it would be taken away. With officials, I'm not quite sure if that happened, but I know they were especially worried about con men who would come along the way. If they had neither of those, they could also have a guarantee from the German Central Committee for Russian Jews. There has been a lot of research done on Jewish charitable organizations that were helping with immigration at that time. I won't go into that, but if you're interested, I can let you know about some books. If you were Russian, you also needed a passport at that time. Austro-Hungarians did not need passports. And also, healthy and, excuse me, and making sure that you were non-criminal. If you notice on this map, okay, they don't have the Austro-Hungarian line drawn in, but right about here is the Austro-Hungarian border. So they have control stations all around here, and then they decide to set up one in Leipzig, far away from the actual border. My argument is that the Leipzig station was not set up originally to prevent the spread of cholera. It was set up as a business tactic. Now, why is that? First of all, it's away from the border, so if you have people coming in with diseases, they're already far into the German Empire. And second of all, it was a major railroad hub. As you can see, there are at least 3 lines going through here, possibly even more. And they thought it would be a lot cheaper and a lot easier just to have everybody come here and then register them. Here's a picture from the Leipzig Illustrated newspaper of the Transmigrant station. At that time, this is sort of a precursor to newspaper photos. If you've ever heard of the London Illustrated newspaper, they also did similar things where they would draw illustrations of things that were going around the UK. And so it's a little bit dark, but as you can see in the back, there are people in a line. They're waiting to register. This around here is a waiting area. You can see people getting tea or drinks. There's some sort of transaction here. I'm not exactly sure what's going on. The interesting thing about the Leipzig station is that there was not alcohol sold there. There was alcohol sold at the Prussian stations, and with the disinfection and bathing, I really don't blame them. But there are also, just sort of a tangent, I was reading a report by an American Immigrant Commission, and they said that the guards and the canteen owner at one of the control stations, they were completely soused. So perhaps Leipzig took cue from that and decided completely not have the selling of alcohol. What my dissertation focuses on is state involvement. And the reason why I chose state involvement is namely because I found hundreds of sources written by state officials of what was seen largely as a business tactic. Why would the state, or the Saxon state and the German state, be interested in registering transmigrants? Well, first of all, once they were registered, they would not fall burden to the state. That was quite a big deal to the local municipalities at the time. And what I also noticed is that there are a lot of sources written between police and railway officials, and these were all Saxon state employees at the time. And they were working to make sure that transmigrants would pass through the station. So here's sort of an outline of what I've been deciding to do with my dissertation. As you can see, I have it in chronological order. It starts with the shipping companies, so I take a business look at it first. And then I focus on police involvement, which would have been the year 1904. That's when they were having problems with immigrants actually going around the station and not wanting to pass through it. In 1905, there was another outbreak of cholera in the Russian Empire, so there was actually discussion of whether or not they should turn the Leipzig registration station into a control station. 1912 is an important year because that's where my sources stop. And I'm trying to figure out exactly why this happens. Now, there could be a few reasons. Has anyone here been to Leipzig, perhaps? And familiar? There's a train station there. Oh, thanks. Can you tell me a little bit about the train station there?
Is it a Kopfbahnhof?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Originally, a Kopfbahnhof is like an end station. So trains don't go through, they end there, and then they go out. The time the registration station was there, they had actually 6 different trains in the city. So they had police trying to organize people from these 6 different train stations and getting them to go to the station. In 1912, that is when the main train station opened up in Leipzig, and that completely encapsulated all of the different train stations that were working at that time. So that's why I suspect maybe the police sources stopped at that time. I also noticed when I was in Berlin, that's when a lot of the other control station sources started tapering off. So I'm trying to figure out if there was some sort of broader economic reason for this, or if the Austro-Hungarian and Russian empires decided to put a safety valve on migration. I'm still sort of trying to figure that out. Transmigration stops in 1914. Can anybody tell me why?
World War?
Yes! The lightning bolt that is World War I. And this completely put a stop to the shipping company business. Now, this also confuses me because if it were the lightning bolt that everyone was talking about, I would expect that there would be sources all the way up to 1914 and then it would just cut off. So I'm trying to figure out that gray area in between 1912 and 1914, exactly what's happening. Chapter 4, I decided to compare transmigration before World War I with transmigration after the war. And this is particularly important because after the war came about the nation state in Europe, and the idea that people belonged to a certain set of boundaries, that they needed passports in order to pass through those boundaries. And I kind of wanted to see what was their attitude towards immigrants at that time, and then also how they categorized those immigrants. Did they look at them as well, of course, not Austro-Hungarians anymore, but perhaps Bohemians, Moravians, or Croats? The problem with focusing just on the state is sometimes the agency of the transmigrant gets lost. This is particularly a problem for people who are studying migration history, is trying to find the voices of the immigrants. So I've decided to do this in 2 ways. First of all, I look for what the immigrants are doing in the police sources I've been reading. And a particularly fun passage I like is, at the time, immigrants were also coming into Germany to work as circular migrants. And so what these transmigrants, these people who wanted to go to harbors, started doing was saying, oh, no, we're just going to northern Germany to work for a little while, nothing to see here. So as you can see, in a few cases, people are stopped as immigrants, but they are revealed not to be such. Instead, they are brick workers or harvesters who want to reach Westphalia in order to seek work there. On the other hand, and these situations are more common, people whose final destination is America pretend that they only want to go to North Germany in order to avoid the Leipzig station. A good number of these people were allowed to travel further in order to avoid an unpleasant confrontation. Sometimes what you'll also notice in the sources are police saying, we confronted these Bohemians and they got really mad, so we just let them go past. And I do like to think that there's a bit of agency in how these immigrants are adapting to the system. I also have used some autobiographies to fill out a little bit of the sources on border control, and I'd like to just read to you a passage of passing through the Leipzig station by a Bulgarian migrant named, in the novel, he's named Peter Meinekov. As soon as he and his fellow travelers arrived and had left their car, they became lost among the surging waves of restless humanity. Husbands were separated from their wives, children from their parents, and friends from their friends. The examination of each person and certification of each passport took but a few minutes because there was a whole army of doctors, nurses, and state officials, and the work was done quickly and with exactness. Here's just a look at the sources I was using. So you have up here the Ministry of the Interior in Dresden, which ran the police at that point. And you have here a letter from Zwickau, which was a police district. So they're writing just to give an update on the, I don't know exactly what they're writing here. What date is it? I think they're just writing here on an update on what the Transmigrants are doing through Saxony. And here you have a letter from Norddeutsche Lloyd, which was a German shipping company based out of Bremen, and they're talking about the opening of the registration station in Leipzig. Here we have something from the Staatsarchiv in Bremen. They actually sent out, because of the fear of cholera that was showing up in Russia at the time, they sent out their own officials to investigate these control and registration stations and see if they were doing their jobs properly. So I'd like to start, first of all, with how many people were actually passing through in just the year 1905, which is 87,166. This is how many people they knew about. There's a possibility that people were smuggled across the border or just didn't report themselves in. They also split people up by the different lines they were traveling from. Lloyd, based in Bremen, Hamburg, America, Antwerpen, that would have been, thinking, Red Star Line, Rotterdam, probably Holland, America, and Canadian Pacific, Canadian line they had reached agreement with. As you can see, they sort of snubbed the English lines, and saying that they weren't really welcome at that time, and just put them all together in one big bunch here. Another interesting thing is that they do not classify people by ethnic groups. They classify them by the regions they came from: Galicians, Bohemians, Austrians. They do have Croats, but that was also a district of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And then Romanians, because that was its own kingdom at that time, and then Russians. The thing about Russian is a lot of the literature, because many of the Russians were Jewish, had referred to it as Eastern European Jewish migration. And though I think that definitely has its reasons and is absolutely necessary, I would also like to point out that they were much more interested in classifying them by the empire that they came from. And they also, unless it has something to do with the Jewish charitable organizations, they rarely refer to the immigrants as Jewish. Now, down here at health, each migrant was examined by a doctor at the station. And as you can see here, they were looking for cholera, but none of these are cholera. Trachoma, which was a disease of the eyes, they sent back about 106 people. Favus, one person, skin sickness, and then mental illness. Here were people that they took to the hospital, and 3 people died at the hospital. So why exactly should people study transmigration? Well, first of all, it can tell us a lot about the motivations that people had for going to the United States. Another reason we should study is the methods that they took to the United States and the routes that they were using, because these can tell us a lot about the technological advances, the economic state of Europe at that time, and also the social and political structures that they were encountering. And also, what a lot of scholars are trying to show now is the transnational nature of migrant control. I think when people think about immigrant control, they think of Ellis Island and people being checked there, when it actually started a lot earlier, particularly in Central Europe. And before I end my talk, I'd like to end with one of the 2 actual visual representations of transmigrants. history. Another one that I could think of was Titanic, which would be the third class passengers, but I don't know, that's sort of a long story and it didn't really end so happily. So I thought I'd go with the film An American Tale. It was released in 1986. It's about the young mouse, Bible Mouskowitz, who leaves his shtetl with his family in Russia, and they go through Hamburg. And the reason we can tell it's Hamburg is that, first of all, it has a subtitle that says Hamburg on it, and also the send-off band that's at the harbor, they're wearing lederhosen, so you can easily tell where you are.
Yes, keep walking.
Look, Papa, smoke. Is the boat on fire?
No, no, keep walking.
Papa, bird. Are these seagulls?
Keep walking.
I just want to see.
Fine, this is the first time I take you to America.
Bye.
Okay, thank you for your attention, and I'm open to any questions that you have on the topic.